this public hearing of the House Game and Fisheries Committee to order and ask all of you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to start out by asking the members to introduce themselves. We'll start up front here with Representative Lucas.
Greg Lucas, 5th District, Erie and Crawford County.
Joe Emmerich, 137th, Northampton County.
Good morning, Todd Rock, Franklin County, 90th District.
Good morning, Dave Maloney to 130th, Berks County.
Jim Cox, 129th, Berks County.
Pam Snyder, 50th, Greene County.
Deborah Cola, Fayette and Westmoreland Counties, 52nd District.
Gary Haluska, 73rd District in Cambria County.
Dan Mal, 91st District, Adams County.
Marcia Hahn, 138, Northampton County.
I'd like to thank the members. Excuse me. We have many meetings going on this morning, so there'll be members coming in and out throughout the morning. I do want to remind everybody that the meeting is being videotaped and streamed on the internet, and so folks who aren't able to be here with us can watch today's hearing. The topic of this meeting is to gather information on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's deer management program. As legislators, I can say that deer management is probably the one topic that we hear from our constituents the most, at least I do, from constituents throughout the state. So I thought that it was important to hold this hearing, and there are a number of bills that have been introduced and referred to the committee dealing with deer management. So I thought the most prudent thing is to have a hearing and discuss all the bills that have been introduced. So this is an opportunity to hear from the Game Commission and hear from our two major sportsman organizations on this particular topic. So I'm looking forward to the information that's being presented. And at this point, I'm going to turn to my co-chair, Representative Haluska, for comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I look at the bills and the things that we're doing here, I've spent about nearly 2 decades on this committee, so I've seen a lot of these things come and go. Some of these bills we've actually talked about for years. We've taken action on some of them, and we've made some changes over the years to some of the things that they now want to revert back to. So it'll be interesting hearing some of the testimony, about how we go about having the management units, about DMAP, about on public lands, some of these different programs. So it'll be interesting to see after, these have been put in place for years now to see, what the reaction is from the people, because obviously when we changed these things before, the people weren't happy with where they were. So we changed them, and now that they've been in place for a number of years, here we are again, deja vu. People are saying, well, it doesn't work, let's change it, let's go back the other way. So it'll be interesting to hear some of the conversation.
Thank you, Chairman Haluska. Also, Representative Fee has joined us. Welcome. And as I said, other members will join us throughout the morning. I do have to say that this is a session day for us, so we have until 11 a.m., at which point we'll have to adjourn for session. So with that, we'll move into the first testifier, and the first organization this morning is the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The executive director, Matt Ho, is with us, along with other folks from your agency. So I would welcome you this morning, and Matt, if you would introduce the people that are with you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kauser, Chairman Haluska, and all members of the House Game and Fisheries Committee. Today we have the Game Commission's basically experts on wildlife management, and I'd like to start with Cal DeBrock, who is the director of the Bureau of Wildlife Management, Dr. Chris Rosenberry, who is the head of the deer team for the Game Commission, Dave Gustafson, who is our state forester, and also Steve Smith is up here with me as our legislative liaison. And I'll turn that over to Mr. DeBrock now at this time.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I want to thank you for the opportunity this morning to comment on the bills that are under consideration and their potential effects on the deer management program. And as Matt points out, my name is Calvin DeBrock, and I'm the Director of the Bureau of Wildlife Management within the Game Commission. I'd like to acknowledge at the outset that there are many Pennsylvanians who are upset with deer management in Pennsylvania, and yet there are many who are pleased also with deer management in Pennsylvania. No one should dispute that opinions are mixed. According to responses in a 2011 survey of over 3,500 deer hunters, 36% expressed overall satisfaction with the program, not an overwhelming endorsement. Yet 33% were dissatisfied, and another 31% weren't sure. So we definitely have mixed reactions. Pennsylvania residents presented a slightly different perspective, though, when surveyed in 2011. Among Pennsylvania residents, satisfaction was high with opportunities to view and watch deer in Pennsylvania. 66% stated that they were satisfied, only 10% dissatisfied. A majority of Pennsylvania residents, 54%, said the deer population in their area was just right. 18% said it was too low. Whether deer populations are high or low, there's always has been, and I'd wager there always will be, substantial controversy about deer and their management here in the Commonwealth and for the people of the Commonwealth. But it should be noted that involving people and listening to them to get their opinion, to get their input, to inform to the development and implementation of the deer program has been vital in shaping our current management approach. Pennsylvania's deer program is a science-based program that aims to achieve 5 goals that have been identified by and with the public, principally hunters, through meetings and workshops over the years. These goals are to maintain healthy and sustainable deer populations, to maintain healthy and sustainable forest habitats for the benefit of both deer and other wildlife, to achieve acceptable levels of deer-human conflicts, to provide recreational opportunities to both use and enjoy deer, and to improve the public's understanding of the deer management program. As noted in a recent legislatively sponsored review of the deer program, the scientific foundation of the program has been judged to be sound. But we have been asked to continue to strive to make improvements when warranted. For example, the review provided numerous recommendations that we have incorporated into the program, into our population modeling, into our health assessments, both for deer and forest, and methods of the ways that we collect citizen input. So in addition, every major component of our deer program has been exposed to professional peer review and has been published in scientific journals. Based upon our most recent data, the deer program is achieving many of the goals that have been prescribed by the public. At the management unit level, we see healthy and sustainable deer populations that are not causing unacceptable levels of deer-human conflict. These assessments are based upon measures of fawn to doe ratios, basically recruitment, deer population trends, and surveys of Pennsylvania citizens. We're also seeing positive responses regarding forest regeneration and the impact of deer on the forest in most wildlife management units. In most WMUs, forest regeneration is considered good. And if regeneration is not good, deer impacts are considered acceptable. These assessments are based upon data collected both on public and private lands throughout the Commonwealth. More information about the deer management measures that we're using are included in the packet that you've been provided. At this time, I'd like to briefly, though, address some of the bills that are under consideration. First, House Bill 870, which would exclude public land from the DMAP program. The Deer Management Assistance Program, or DMAP, allows landowners to increase antlerless harvests on their property to achieve their individual management objectives. DMAP's impact on deer harvest across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, though, is limited. In most WMUs, DMAP adds only 1 to 2% to the overall antlerless harvest in that management unit. However, there is one exception, and that's in 2G. And 2G has gotten most people's attention. And in that area, because it is a large forested management unit with a lot of public land, DMAP actually, in the past, it has added somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 20%. In 2012, 19%. to the antlerless harvest. The combination of higher DMAP harvests and public land in 2G has caused concerns for many. In recent years, we've captured and monitored more than 1,000 deer on public lands and private lands in 2G. And from these deer, we know that 9 out of 10 actually survive the hunting seasons, even on DMAP properties. We've seen differences between public and private lands, and we'll acknowledge that, but they were actually the opposite of what most people would expect. Deer on private land were harvested at a higher rate than those on public land. Finally, it's not easy to get into DMAP. Public landowners are required to complete detailed deer management plans prior to enrolling in DMAP, and an example of one of those management plans has been provided for your information. The next bill, House Bill 1146, would remove antler restrictions for senior hunters. Back in 2002, based upon hunter feedback, the Game Commission changed antler restrictions to protect at least half of the yearling bucks and to make most of the adult bucks legal for harvest. Antler restrictions have been a biological and social success from our perspective. Biologically, harvest rates of yearling bucks have declined, and hunters are harvesting more adult bucks. Socially, hunters continue to support antler restrictions. Based upon the 2011 Deer Hunter Survey of 3,500 hunters, a majority of hunters support antler restrictions, including seniors, who support the current antler restrictions by a 2-to-1 margin. Concerning House Bill 1370, which would establish a separate 3-day antlerless season. Prior to 2000, Pennsylvania had a 2-week antlered firearms season followed by a 3-day antlerless season. In 2001, the Commission switched to a 12-day concurrent firearms season to minimize the impact of weather on the antlerless harvest and to give hunters more time to hunt. For both the 3-day and the 12-day seasons, the harvest of antlerless deer is controlled not by really the season length, but more by the number of antlerless licenses allocated to hunters. Advocates believe that returning to a 3-day season will lead to greater hunter satisfaction with the number of deer they see, the number of deer that they harvest, and achieve greater hunter participation. During the 90s, there was a 3-day antlerless season and deer populations were increasing. Yet most hunters said deer populations were too low. In 2011, when we did another deer hunter survey, again, hunters said the deer populations were too low. Regardless of antlerless season length, deer hunters have consistently said deer populations are too low. Some would argue that a 3-day antler season will make Pennsylvania a top deer hunting state again, a destination, if you will. In the 1990s, Pennsylvania ranked second nationally in terms of deer harvest. In 2012, after more than a decade of 7-day or 12-day antlerless seasons, Pennsylvania still holds this rank as second in the nation in deer harvest. In addition, hunter success rates have changed little from the 90s to today. Finally, it's important, I think, to note that when, concerning declining deer numbers, license sales dropped more in the 1990s with a 3-day season than they have in the last 11 years with the current deer program. So it's understandable, I think, that hunters want to see more deer. However, a majority of hunters less than 50 years of age prefer a 12-day antlerless season because time to hunt is an important factor for many of our hunters, and a chart comparing a 3- and 12-day season has been provided for your information. House Bill 1724 would implement county-based management units. In 95, we did a deer hunter survey, and hunters agreed by a 6-to-1 margin that new management units needed to be created, and they should be based on habitat. Today's habitat-based management units provide a number of advantages over the previous county-based system. WMUs capture changes in habitat and changes in land ownership and human population characteristics better than the county boundaries did. WMUs are defined by physical boundaries such as roads and streams and rivers on the landscape, boundaries that make sense to hunters, and it's what they ask for. As shown on the handout in your packet, Dauphin County is a good example of why wildlife management unit boundaries are better than county boundaries and preferred by hunters. Finally, it's important to note that when counties are used for deer management in the past, the 67 counties that were grouped into multi-county groups for data analysis. And the basic reason is that there's too few data based on individual counties. So it basically forced our hand to collect the information and use similar rates for adjoining counties. If we were to return to counties for the basis of deer management or wildlife management, counties would necessarily have to be grouped to have enough data for data analysis and to make management decisions. And then finally, just to touch on House Bill 1726, which would require the Commission to manage for maximum sustained yield, or MSY. Pennsylvania's current deer management program is designed to provide a deer population at which public goals can be achieved. Admittedly, the program is not based upon MSY, maximum sustained yield theory, and there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, MSY ignores the social aspects of deer management. That is, whether people feel there are too many deer or too few. MSY is strictly a biological concept. Frankly, MSY at the unit scale is unrealistic. As noted in the textbook Biology and Management of White-tailed Deer, expectations have been unrealistically raised by concepts such as maximum sustained yield. While a useful concept in discussing and understand population theory, it's not particularly useful in the real world of deer managers. It should be noted that MSY management likely will not satisfy hunters. MSY management does not result in large deer populations or large sightings of deer. It results in the opposite. The results of an MSY assessment based on deer productivity can be found in your packet, and it's displayed there in the form of a map. Notice that nearly all WMUs in the Commonwealth are at or near MSY. There are some exceptions. Deer populations in 5C and 5D near Philadelphia are below MSY. So if we were required to manage by MSY, we'd actually be managing for increased deer populations in those areas. These are areas where the public is telling us that they would like to see fewer deer, not more. In 2G, that area in north central Pennsylvania is above MSY. If required to manage there by MSY, we would have recommended that deer population reductions in this area occur. And this is an area where people would feel the population is too low and they'd like to see more deer. So in closing, we support efforts to improve the deer management program. In fact, the sole purpose of our research program and our regular evaluations is to make the program better. We regularly ask for hunter input and adjust recommendations accordingly. We're committed to an adaptive approach that embraces change shaped by collaboration with hunters and the public that will produce healthy deer and habitats that provide recreation without imposing economic hardship on farm, forest, and suburban landowners. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide comment today on the deer management program and on these bills, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I appreciate the testimony, and I know the members will have a lot of questions. One question that I wanted to ask, and you started out your testimony with talking about surveys and hunter satisfaction from those surveys, and one line in your testimony is the majority of Pennsylvania residents, 54%, said the deer population in their area was just right. How was that survey conducted? Because I come from the north central part of the state, the 2G area that you're talking about, 3A, and I could clearly say that not 50% of the hunters in that area are satisfied. So can you talk a little bit more about how that survey was conducted?
That survey was actually, and I may defer here to Chris Rosenberry in a moment, but that survey, as I recall, was a telephone survey done by Responsive Management, which is an outside vendor who specializes in doing wildlife-related or wildlife agency work. So they do human dimensions work. It was a telephone survey of 9,200 citizens across the Commonwealth who were selected at random. So that was a summary overall. Chris, do you have any breakdowns by management unit?
In your particular area in 2G and 3A, the survey itself, from the results of the survey, that was one of the areas where citizens said populations were too low. So the fact that when we provide a statewide number that says most of the folks said the populations were just right, that's a statewide average, but certainly that varied by unit. In your particular area, most of the citizens in that area said the deer population was too low. That's one of the reasons why in Unit 3A, north of Route 6, this year we're making a recommendation to increase the deer population because the management goals are being met and folks want more deer.
an important thing to point out from your testimony is this is a majority of Pennsylvania residents. It's not necessarily Pennsylvania hunters, correct? So that's an important point that people are commenting that aren't even hunters on this particular survey. We'll turn to the members for questions. Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you letting me go first because I must sneak out for another hearing, but then I will be back shortly. Thank you, Calvin, for your testimony. One of the things that came to mind in your testimony, I heard you say that economic impact wasn't one of the criteria that you look at for deer management, but yet economic impact is all about the hunters that are in the woods and the survivability of the area. How could you sit there and say that economic impact isn't part of the criteria when it actually controls your criteria?
It's an interesting concept. I think economic impact, there's a couple of ways to answer this. I guess one way is that economic impact is a social factor, and board members certainly factor that in as we provide them counsel on biological indications and indicators. The other side of that, though, is that economic impact is felt by too many deer as well as too few. So hunters are an economic driver in the system, but also the impact deer have on the landscape and on the habitat as an economic driver, as has been pointed out by members of the General Assembly in the past too, when we've been counseled about the impact that deer have on forest systems and on the agricultural community and others. So all of those things are actually woven into it as we look at it. Deer metrics, for example, reproduction, reflect the impact of the landscape, because if we have a degraded habitat, deer aren't as productive. So you can relate that again to an economic indicator of what's happening on the landscape. So we don't have a lot of real metrics in terms of how deer directly contribute to the economic well-being of various communities in the Commonwealth. But that's something we get anecdotally through surveys of people, and so that's how we factor that in. I don't know, Chris, if you'd like to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is the goals that we have today were identified by stakeholders, including hunters, and none of them identified economic factors as one of the goals that they would like us to achieve.
Well, I took the privilege of reading ahead a little bit, and if you ask the people of Cinnamahoney Sportsmen's Association, they don't view it quite the same way that you just explained that when they have cabins that have been sitting empty for years, it's definitely something that changes their landscape from an economic impact point of view. And eventually, if the hunters all do dry up, how are you going to control the deer population there?
Obviously, if the hunters dry up, you're not going to control the deer population there. Certainly not the way we do it today. In terms of the economics and deer populations, I think if we look back historically, we can go back to 1982 at the peak of our license sales, and we've seen license sales on a steady decline since '82, despite the fact that through many of those years, deer populations were increasing. So for a deer management program, there's a limit to what we can do. We can attempt to manage population abundance through our program, but historically that's shown that is not a major factor. Increasing the deer population is not going to solve the hunter number issue. I think it's more complex than that and something beyond what we can do simply within a deer program.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. One thing that I wanted to point out, there's certainly a lot of interest in this particular topic, and so we've been joined by a number of other members, Representative Heffley, Representative Gillespie, Representative English, Representative Pfeiffer, Representative Gobler, Representative Mosser, and Chairman Metcalf has joined us. So thank the members for coming today. Next question will be from Representative Kula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. DeBrock. I just want to talk a little bit about the DMAP program, since that is my bill. And I believe at your annual report, there was testimony that I forget what the number was as to how many DMAPs were reported on public lands. Do you have that number?
3,000 something. Number
You
of
mean
antlerless
deer
deer.
harvest? Are you speaking of deer
47
harvest?
47%
Yeah.
Okay.
actually reported.
Actually reported. And that's the point I want to make. I believe it was also brought out that not everybody reports. Is that correct?
They are required to report with DMAP. It's mandatory reporting whether you harvest your deer or not.
But
And
only 47% of the DMAPs were reported.
correct.
So that means that there could have been many more killings of deer with those DMAPs than what was reported. Correct?
I would say theoretically, yes. I would say our experience would illustrate that when we've followed up a non-response in the past, the non-responses have not killed a deer. The non-respondents had not killed a deer.
And I believe when DMAP began, the purpose of DMAP was to afford farmers and people that their land was being used to generate crops and all of that. That was the purpose of it. And then we expanded to public lands. And as I said when I presented this legislation, that since I have been in the House, all I have heard from hunters is we will go out day after day after day during hunting season and we see no deer. I just talked to a young lady here this morning. She turns 12 tomorrow, so can begin hunter safety. She has been out 6 times and has seen 1 deer. So, I mean, this is something that I think this bill will at least give us a chance to maybe bring about our deer population. When I talk with hunters that say from Pennsylvania, that don't even hunt in Pennsylvania anymore, that they go to West Virginia and Ohio. And when you look at the economics, the money that we are losing here in Pennsylvania because of hunters leaving the area, hunters not hunting, then something has to be done. And I'm hoping that the legislation we're reviewing here today will hopefully bring about more deer hunting here in the Commonwealth. If anybody wants to comment.
I don't think the Game Commission or the Bureau of Wildlife Management is opposed to increasing deer hunting in Pennsylvania. We're actually very committed, and it's one of our major goals. The challenge is balancing that. And we're beginning to see now within the DMAP program, you're absolutely correct. The DMAP program was fashioned to provide an opportunity for a landowner to deal with deer impacts on their property and to engage hunters in the process of solving that problem for them, rather than giving them a special permit to take matters into their own hands. In fact, the law, Title 34, provides landowners the opportunity to take things into their own hands. But we've created this program with sportsmen to engage sportsmen in helping landowners solve their problems. Public landowners in the state forest system and the state park system are responsible for large areas of land. And they have deer on that landscape, and they're experiencing real challenges. And I'm sure you've had testimony in the past from the state forester or from the Department of Agriculture as well about impacts that they are feeling and the economic hardship that they're feeling on managing their properties as well. And so it's a balancing act. We do make them run the gauntlet of proving that deer are the root of their economic woes, that deer can, but through a reduction, solve their problem without just broadcasting antlerless permits across an entire WMU and possibly then having deer removed in areas where they're really not creating significant problems. So it's a scalpel rather than a meat cleaver in terms of trying to tackle deer at the WMU level. If we cut back on DMAP and we wouldn't permit public landowners to participate, I mean, the Game Commission has chosen not to use DMAP on the state game land system. DCNR has chosen to employ it because it's available to them. As a consequence, if we cut back, they're not able to remove deer in that way, then they're going to be back into fencing. They're going to be back into removing deer in other ways. And so there's a different state agency that will be spending more money in a different way. I'm not sure that that's going to ultimately provide more hunting recreation, though. And I think the linkage between the two is relatively weak at this point. So we have, over the years, reduced deer populations to bring deer in balance. There's no doubt about that. And we are moving, as habitat has recovered, as Chris Rosenberry pointed out, we are moving into several management units because habitat is recovered, regeneration is good, advocating a reduction in the number of antlerless permits and allowing populations to again grow. But it is a balancing act, and it's a balancing act for not only deer, but the impact deer have on the landscape, on humans that work on that land, depend on that land for a living, as well as other wildlife. We're responsible as stewards of wildlife resources in the Commonwealth for 480 species. Deer are but one of those. And so deer do have an impact on other species like grouse, on snowshoe hares, on woodcock, and a variety of other species that require early successional forest and depend upon basically the forest understory for food and cover. And so this is the balancing act and something we grapple with every day. The decisions aren't easy, as you well know. And so we would advocate that I think that we continue to provide this tool to landowners across the Commonwealth, whether they're public or private landowners.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to the other testimony here today, but I know there are other questions by members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Kula. We've also been joined by Representative Linda Culver. Thank you, Representative, for coming today. Next question is by Representative Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know this is probably 1/10 of the amount of time that's needed today to go over some of these things, but Mr. Chairman, you brought up a question with respect to not only the response of hunters and what you hear. I want to make a statement to the fact that so many different things are mentioned here about Title 34, the sportsman, so on. Even your survey, sir. I believe, if I remember the survey that you're referring to, that a large percentage of the people who were surveyed admitted that where they do their wildlife observation is in their backyard. That's your own survey. So, having said that, I'd like to get to some of the things with respect to the numbers of people who actually are concerned and should be represented in the state. As Representative Mao brought up, and I know he left, he brought up one of the letters that have been sent to us and some of the facts of, he brought up Cinnamahoney, 5,000 members. We have Allegheny County sportsmen, 200,000 sportsmen. Eastern Pennsylvania Firearms Coalition, 150,000+ sportsmen. Unified Sportsmen, 70,000. Firearm Owners Against Crime, 28 to 50,000 total associates. Pennsylvania State Camp Leases Association, 50,000 members. With the real estate market, here's a letter here just from a real estate broker who has spoken about the fact that these camps are sitting idle. There's very little value to them. He's very concerned with where it's going, how they're going to even survive. We've heard from biologists like yourself, commissioners, WCOs. They disagree with you. They're your own people. Talk about economics. Our own budget, our own legislative budget and finance report showed $285 million a year loss. When you add the $130 million of lost revenue from hunters who no longer hunt or purchase hunting licenses, you are now pushing yourself to the billions of dollars of lost economic money to the state of Pennsylvania. I don't think you have to be reminded that pretty much everything we hear on a daily basis in this building has to do with money. I'm not so sure that the representation that you're talking about is even accurate. Your own survey, a telephone survey? I mean, that's an insult. Listen to the hunters. You want to talk about people who manage their own private property for the hopes? I do this myself. Here's an article you probably all saw. Has to do with a man that does this, who even approved originally of your program. He gives suggestions on what to do. Wherever you live or hunt, I strongly encourage you to monitor deer herd as much as possible as you can make the management decisions, or you can share that data with the persons calling the shots. It's also helpful to share the information with your state, your wildlife agencies. Complaining rarely helps, but sharing information can be productive. Now that's a wildlife deer biologist who does it every day, manages his own property, and quite frankly, sir, it is your duty to fix our habitat. So I think when we see this stuff about science, your own mastermind, Gary Alt, said this was done out of politics, not science. So I think when I asked Mr. Ho some time ago on what he felt and how he felt that the sportsmen were being represented, or what the sportsmen thought of the agency and the direction thereof, if he felt it was positive. I have to wonder about the numbers that I just showed you on how you can even remotely answer that as positive. Mr. Chairman, I will have several questions later. I'll allow room for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Maloney. Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming out today and testifying. First of all, I believe it was last summer, we were invited, the Game and Fisheries Committee, to the Game Commission headquarters for an overview of your deer management program. And if I remember correctly, you basically have a three-prong approach to how you manage deer. One was forests and forestry. One was deer-human conflicts, which to my, I guess, shouldn't have been a surprise, has to do with insurance companies and the amount of car accidents caused by deer. Is that accurate?
No.
Not completely?
No.
Okay. We'll have to revisit that.
It has to do with farmers and landowners, basically.
Okay. But I do remember that being a component of it. So we can revisit that at some point, just so I can get my information corrected. And then the third part, which when I left that meeting, was hunters. And it appeared to me that the hunters were probably the least important of those three groups as far as your decision-making in your deer management programs. And I just, for all the talk we hear both from the Game Commission and the Fish and Boat Commission, the newfound phrase is the science, the science, the science. Okay, that's the default fallback response. And yet, I don't see the science. And maybe you're not showing it to us. Maybe I don't see it. I really don't see it. I'll give you a few examples. The survey, to go back to Representative Maloney's point, not even 1,000 random households by telephone survey of what people think is the appropriate level of the deer herd. That is absurd. To me, that's embarrassing. I'll give you an example. If I got a phone call at my house and said, would you rate your satisfaction of your shopping experience at the King of Prussia Mall? And I answered that question, Do you think, just for the record, I haven't been to the King of Prussia Mall, and I can't tell you how long. Okay, so I have no idea what that experience is like. And if I said, oh, King of Prussia Mall, I think I heard of that place once. It must be nice down there. Oh, yeah, it's good. It's great. Yep, King of Prussia Mall is great. Well, there goes into the survey. One satisfied customer for the King of Prussia Mall. Oh, I see these nice deer in the backyard. Oh, they're such beautiful animals. Oh, I think the deer herd's great. Now, that doesn't sound credible. That has no credibility as far as I'm concerned with using that as a huge component of your decision to figure out, is the deer herd appropriate based on surveys of people in the state? And I said this is a continuation from the annual report a few weeks ago, but who are the experts? The hunters are the experts. The hunters are the ultimate conservationists. The hunters are the ones who spend more time in the forest, in the fields, than anybody else, who see more deer, who can personally testify to what they experience more than anybody. Not even close. So why they're not the largest component of your deer management program, I have no idea, but it should be. The second question with the science is, when we have a DMAP program, and as you reported at your annual report, and again this morning from Representative Kula, 47% of your people are reporting what they're harvesting, yet they are required to report, correct?
Correct.
They're required to report. And I asked you at the annual report, there was no consequence for not reporting. Why aren't those DMAPs pulled from those people who refuse to report?
I can tell you from experience, when we did DMAP the initial year, and there were consequences identified, we were asked by members of the General Assembly and by commission members to exonerate the people, give them a pass, and allow them to participate in the future. That is why we are not imposing upon people. It's more important for us to know the consequences of their hunting effort and the permit.
I'm not quite sure I understand that response, to be honest with you. Can you say that again? You're saying the General Assembly asked you to not implement consequences?
I can tell you, I didn't say the General Assembly. I said members of the General Assembly and commissioners and others who have influence ask us to look the other way, take the response late, take the response, just enable people to continue to participate, because the consequences were failure to report will result in a fine and lack of participation in subsequent years.
Okay, well, the whole point is to have people participate.
The whole point.
And accurately know what deer are being harvested.
The whole point is for citizens to, yes, to take on the responsibility that they signed on for, which is you buy a permit, you go out and hunt. If you harvest a deer, you report it. If you don't harvest a deer, you report it.
Correct.
It's very simple, pretty straightforward.
But
yet less than half do that.
Right, so there are no consequences for not reporting.
Well, we attempted, as I said, in year one, we attempted to enact consequences, and we were asked not to.
So when was year one?
Oh, when was year one?
2003.
3.
Okay, so after year one, you stopped
So
imposing any
after year
consequences.
one, we started reminding people to apply and using minimum numbers and estimating harvest. Because again, as it was pointed out, that in most units, it's inconsequential in terms of the overall management decision, because we're accounting for 1% to 2% of the overall antlerless harvest within a management unit.
Thank you for saying that, because it reinforces just how flawed your whole policy is. How do you possibly know it's 1% to 2% when people aren't reporting and you have no idea what's being harvested?
We absolutely do know.
How?
Again, unless you're dissatisfied with an estimate, because we are estimating harvest, there's no doubt about that, and we have reported to the Assembly in the past on how we estimate harvest. We report at we had a discussion on Monday with the Board of Commissioners on methods for estimating harvest, because less than 100% of folks who actually participate in hunting harvest a deer actually report it to the Game Commission. We're
Right.
forced to estimate harvest. And we do it with relatively good, I think, statistical precision.
Well, I think that reinforces another point of your failed science with using estimations, as I brought up at the annual hearing, where doing simple calculations, 1 out of 3 hunters harvested a deer, which I said would probably be laughed at if you took that out throughout the state to the hunters. And how you can estimate. Why don't we have some kind of more precise reporting measures like some other states do?
For example,
And the response I got back right immediately after the meeting was, oh, we can't do that. We can't ask people to report. Why not? Well, because it's going to be 50 cents, 70 cents a person. Well, I don't know if that's accurate or not. And I don't know why it would cost that much to have somebody report. So how about if and I'm not suggesting this idea, like I said before, if somebody buys a deer license and they go back the next year to buy their deer license, you ask them a question. Did you harvest a deer last year? Yes or no? And you document it. You make it mandatory reporting. But if you're not going to reinforce or enforce DMAP reporting for consequences, what does it matter? There's no way the science can be accurate.
we recently summarized information for the Board of Commissioners, and we certainly share with members of this committee and the General Assembly different reporting methods and different alternatives. And the ones that you've mentioned, Representative, have been discussed. And again, our job, at least my job within the Bureau and within the agency, is to provide counsel to the Executive Director and Board. I don't make those decisions, but we will provide them counsel. We'll provide the best information we can on reporting alternatives, and we have done that. I can't help but reflect, and we're so fond of anecdote, so anecdotally, that many people across the United States are looking at Pennsylvania's deer management program, and rather than running away from it, they're emulating it. So if it is so wrong and so broken,
Can you give me examples of 3 states that are doing that right now?
we're seeing examples where people have abandoned check stations, and they're using the same methods for calculating reporting rates that we are doing.
Where?
The state of Maryland, as an example.
Yes. In terms of states emulating Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, Wisconsin are 3 that I can give you. New York and Virginia are working and have projects on the ground right now to develop a forest sampling system similar to what we have for their deer programs, and we've been in contact with Wisconsin here recently because they've gotten rid of their check stations. If you look at other states, and we did this survey of the Northeast from Virginia up into the Canadian provinces, there's only 3 states that estimate the total harvest. Pennsylvania, New York, they use a similar method. Ontario uses a hunter survey, which Pennsylvania also uses as a double check of our reporting rate estimates. All other states provide minimum counts as their harvest estimate, or their harvest, not an estimate. They operate off of a minimum count. If we did that in Pennsylvania, we'd be operating off of 120,000 reports at this point. And many of them have no idea what that compliance represents.
Did you say that Maryland was one of those states that's moving away?
They changed their reporting rate.
Maryland no longer has check stations.
Do they have mandatory reporting?
Yes,
all these states have mandatory reporting.
Thank you.
Just as we
Thank
do.
you.
We have mandatory reporting also. But let me, I guess, say one last thing. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We are not pleased. We're not happy with the reporting rates that we're getting. We're dissatisfied. We'd love to come back to the board every year, to members of the assembly, and say 100% of the folks that bought a license last year reported. Okay, or 100% of the folks who harvested a deer actually reported. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So we do need to figure a way to determine what the harvest was so we can make the best possible recommendation so that we are managing this resource in the most responsible way, or at least the best way that we can.
But you've been using the same methodology for how long?
Oh, we've altered the methodologies several times over the years.
Yeah. The current harvest estimates have been in place, the method has since 2004.
So you haven't changed it in 10 years?
Correct.
And the population has plummeted. And I go back
That's
to
not true.
my issue
That's
with the
not true, though.
science. Okay, my issue with the science goes all the way back to when the whole deer management program changed in 2001. Okay, which I didn't really at that time have a problem with because I didn't know exactly what was going to happen and the impact. But I do remember specifically that one of the primary talking points was that the buck to doe ratio was so out of whack that there were 36 doe for every buck. That needed to be adjusted. Antler restrictions were implemented to bring in bigger buck, which I don't really have that much of a problem with myself. But it was only a few years after that that I go to a hearing held by then Representative Grusella and Daly, and I asked the commission members there, you know, well, what's happened here? They had no idea what I was talking about. So here you have a scientifically based opportunity to manage a program, a deer herd, based on what to me sounds like sound science, looking at buck to doe ratio, something we can verify, something we have facts that we can check and study, empirical data, and nobody has any idea. You're using horrendously flawed estimation reports. You don't know buck to doe ratio. You've got WMUs that are controversial. You're not requiring people with consequence who are in DMAP, so therefore you have no idea what, even on that small scale, what people are doing or not doing. You know, we've asked, what's the position on coyote predation? How much coyote predation is there? Oh, there's no reason to even do a study, or bear predation or anything else, because that came up in the last 2 years. So I'd like to know what science, other than trying to find out fawn fatality rates and survival rates, what science are you using?
I think all of the things you mentioned, frankly, are based upon studies that, many of the things, I should say, not certainly all, but many are based upon studies that actually have been conducted. And so I'm at a loss. And in fact, I think our program was subjected to 3 different audits over the last decade. All of them basically said the science was good. There are tweaks that we could make. There are changes that we can make. We've incrementally incorporated those. We've subjected our studies, our research, looking at fawn survival and predation studies out on the landscape. We've had radio transmitters and collars on more than 5,000 deer on Pennsylvania's landscape over the last decade and looked at predation as an example. So there have been a lot of studies. So I'm not certain actually what you're asking.
Well, this will be my last question, Mr. Chairman, and respect to everybody else. When's the last predation study that was done? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll answer. The last predation study was conducted in 2000, 2001. Since that time, we've been monitoring fawn to doe ratios, and we have seen stable fawn to doe ratios in every unit since 2003. We look at fawn to doe ratios in the harvest because we know from that fawn study that most of that predation is occurring during the summer. So by the time fawns enter into the hunting season, when we begin to sample them, those fawns represent the fawns that have survived the predation period. So that's the method that we use, and I would encourage you in terms of the data, the back of that first packet, the large one in terms of antlers allocation, our recommendations and supporting information, and the back of that packet for every single unit is listings of the data that we use, and then it also provides the charts and the technique that we step through in order to get to our recommendations. So the data are in that one packet of information that you have.
Thank you, Representative Emmerich. Representative Kula, a follow-up question?
Yeah, just one. I think I was taken a little aback by your answer as to the reporting on the DMAPs, that you said it wasn't the General Assembly that asked you not to do anything, the General Assembly per se, but there were members and other people that asked that you not do anything to penalize anyone that does not, that fails to report. And I guess my thinking is, if it's that easy, that if a member can just ask and you will follow up and do that, then maybe I'm asking that you just kind of institute everything that we're proposing here today, if that's what it takes to get these things done. Just a little comment.
Thank you, Representative Kula. Representative Maloney, a follow-up comment, question?
Yeah, I was a little bit troubled by some of the things that I heard when you talk about, again, my original question some time ago and even today was about the relationship and the public relations between you and the hunters, and how that's following through to what's at hand. And, you know, I used the example of this one article, and Representative Emmerich brought up the fact that your last predation, he asked you your last predation report in 2001, I think was your answer. So we're looking at how many years later. The very point by this biologist and man from Pennsylvania with his own Pennsylvania study is predation. Again, I go back to comments made by your mastermind, Gary Alt, who said after 25 years of being the bear biologist, he did not know that they were the #1 predator of the fawn. Now, when we have the coyote situation, we have the bears, and this man talks about how he likes bear hunting, but they're preying on too many of the fawns. So I guess it would be somewhat troubling to me that you would wait this long to do another study. I mean, we hear the inconsistencies here today with what I think many of us want to see is the mending made between the agency and the hunters who are the #1 stakeholders here, the sportsmen. And I think the cry that you're hearing here, which I have basically been stating since coming here, is to make that mend. We can't have the continuing bullying out on the field. I mean, we have an individual here in this room who says that those bear hunters are lucky they're not being prosecuted after they were told by a fish commissioner where to hunt. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that doesn't entreat me. And then you make it very clear that the legislature or whoever put pressure on you to change your tactics. And then in the other line, you complain that the legislature's involved. Now, I don't know how you reconcile that. I really don't. The sportsmen out there feel like they're lost. Here's another one for you. We got a letter, several of us in this room today and on this committee got a letter accusing us of doing our job. Now, I thought that was an interesting concept. We're voted by people, 62 to 70,000 approximate people, to represent them in Harrisburg, to be on committees of our interest and or liking or appointment, to do a job. And because we're voted for by the people and supported by the people to do our job, we should resign from this committee. That's the type of bully tactic I don't do well with. Because the sportsmen are not being represented here. What you're telling us today is so inconsistent. It's okay not to report DMAT, but God help you if you do something wrong in the woods because we're coming after you. That's not public relations good for the sportsman. And yes, I'm passionate and I can be impatient, and I apologize for that. But I think the time is now to fix this. And my last question to you, men, is do you hunt and do you buy a license in Pennsylvania?
I think the answer is yes.
You think?
Across the board here. For
Do
these
you
individuals
report?
sitting
Do
at
you
this table.
do you shoot a deer and report?
Of course.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Unfortunately, based upon field checks and getting our hands on 25 to 30,000 deer a year, unfortunately, the majority of Pennsylvanians do not report, though. And that's an unfortunate circumstance. And it's something that we have to deal with in order to provide adequate recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. And so gratifying, though, to know is that, again, as Dr. Rosenberry pointed out, as we keep our finger on the pulse of deer populations across the Commonwealth, as we monitor deer herd health through things like fawn to doe ratios, we're seeing recruitment not changing substantially across management units. That means it doesn't mean it's the same in every management unit, but within management units, because we make decisions at the management unit level, we're not seeing substantial changes. So the issue of predation would show up first, as we'd see, because younger animals are typically more vulnerable, you'd begin to see a change in the fawn to doe ratio in the harvest. Gratifyingly, that's not the case. Do we have an indirect measure, if you will, of predation? Absolutely. Have we done very specific predation studies in the last decade? No, we haven't. But we are keeping our finger on the pulse of that. It's impossible, if the deer population is being decimated, for us to continue to see hunter success rates remain relatively stable as they have over the last 2 decades. It would be impossible to see sustained harvest as we're seeing each and every year. Each and every year we're hearing from hunters saying, I had a great season, and we're hearing from hunters saying, I didn't see a deer. Yet every year we go out and we send teams of people out, and despite the fact that maybe individually we didn't see many deer either when we were out, as we visit processors, as we visit camps, we're getting our hands on 24, 25, 26,000 deer. We're getting report cards in from 110, 120,000 hunters, and we're seeing stable harvest. You can't do that if you're running a deer population into the ground. So there seems to be a disconnect. There's no doubt about it. Are we satisfied that some hunters are that with a 33% or 36% satisfaction rate? Absolutely not. And that nearly a third of hunters are dissatisfied. It troubles us a great deal. We're not sure what we can do about it, because if we go about letting deer populations ramp up as they did in the 90s, and I've been the bureau director here within the Game Commission for 24 years now. I've been through the period of time in the 90s when I appeared before the General Assembly telling me that deer populations were decimating our forests and farms and do something about it. At the same time, hunters are telling us deer populations are too low and we don't see enough. If we do that, the tides will turn and we're going to hear it. And I think Representative Holiska was there at those times as well, and he alluded to them in his earlier comments. So it's not an easy problem to solve. But we are attempting as best we can to provide the very best counsel and bring the best science to bear as we counsel the executive director and commissioners on the subject of deer management.
Chairman Holiska?
Thanks, Cal. Basically, people have to understand that the Game Commission, represents, if, like people say, the hunting population is only 10% of the population in the state. So they have to make a lot of decisions for that other 90% also. That, as you say, the agriculture, the forest products industry, and everybody else has a stake in this because they own a lot of the land that we hunt on, especially agriculture. I know in western Pennsylvania where I live, if it wasn't for agriculture, we wouldn't have the deer population that we do have. So we have to pay attention to that 90%. And as far as mandating reporting, I know Ohio just did away with the check stations this past year when we were out there hunting. The Game Commission has been considered heavy-handed ever since I've been here. And that's one battle that we've had with the commission about being heavy-handed, with the sportsmen, to back off. If you see them doing something absolutely wrong, go after them, but don't bother them in the field. So, I agree. You can't get that heavy-handed with your sportsmen. If you refuse to sell somebody a license because they didn't report the last year, you're only going to decimate your hunting population even more. So I understand some of the problems that they have.
Thank you, Chairman Holiska. I also wanted to point out that we've received testimony from many different organizations and individuals after we announced this hearing that will be included for the official transcript of the meeting and will be provided to the members. So even though members have to go to other meetings and things, the information will be provided to the members. And one thing that I wanted to follow up on, this is a fact-finding mission. This is an information gathering thing. And one of the things that we hear all the time is that the legislature should stay out of it. We hear that constantly. The legislature should stay out of it. The science should dictate. But we're the people that the sportsmen come to when they have problems. And so to Representative Maloney's point, we're hearing from many, many sportsmen on the topic of deer management. And so that's why the legislature is getting involved. And I think it's important for the committee to look at these issues. I know that the commission had asked to testify first at this hearing because the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee is meeting right now to issue the report dealing with the merger study of the Pennsylvania Game Commission and Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and I know you're eager to get to that meeting. So now we'll thank you for your testimony and move on to our next testifier. Thank you, gentlemen.
Very much.
Thank you.
Our next testifier will be Mr. Randy Santucci, President of the Unified Sportsmen of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Randy, and you may proceed.
Thank you. First one is Mr. Martin Salinas present today in the audience? I don't know if Martin was able to make it or not. Guess not, okay. He was going to provide some supporting testimony from the Camp Lease Owners Association, but he may have had a last-minute problem. I'm going to move through this briskly because I try to get it all in and without getting off point. But good morning, Chairman Causer, Chairman Holiska, all committee members and legislators present. Recognition is also deserved for the residents in attendance who traveled from across the Commonwealth. My name is Randy Santucci, President of the Unified Sportsmen of Pennsylvania. I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to testify today on behalf of our organization and for all sportsmen that support our position regarding the downward trend of Pennsylvania deer hunting. First, I would like to address House Resolution 576, Mr. Lucas's resolution, changing the opening day of deer season from Monday following Thanksgiving to the Saturday following Thanksgiving. We believe this resolution is not wanted and damaging to our deer hunting heritage. This change will be met with a cataclysmic divide between camp hunters and owners, and those that hunt basically from home. Representative Lucas has already identified responses to this idea are running around 2/3 against the proposal. A Saturday opener would be the final nail in the coffin of traditional camp deer hunting in Pennsylvania, already deeply damaged from the excessive reduction of our deer herd, which is being addressed here today by other legislation. The camp experience involves opening a closed cold camp, unloading equipment, supplies, addressing problems encountered in this opening, such as water, furnace, or other utility issues. Saturday and Sunday include activities such as scouting and accompanying a new youth hunter into an area he or she intends to hunt to choose a hunting spot. All this is done as part of hunt preparation. And does anyone here today honestly believe that that can all be accomplished in the dark Friday evening after arriving at camp and then subsequently awake at 5 a.m. hunt the next morning, which would be Saturday? The last and equally important aspect is the camaraderie of the camp experience, often encompassing family and friends, hunters discussing strategies over dinner and sharing experiences and stories around their campfire. In short, a Saturday opener will ruin the traditional camp experience enjoyed by many hunters, and it will further contribute to the economic demise of the northern tier businesses. Moving forward, the following deer management related bills directed at changing Pennsylvania's failed deer program are not extreme or overreaching in nature, nor conceptually new. In fact, they are no more than reinstituting proven parameters that existed previously for decades and served our sportsmen and Commonwealth very well. House Bill 1146, excluding seniors from antler restrictions, is strongly supported by Unified. Aging hunters have paid their dues over their lifetime as licensed buyers. Also, age brings with it hurdles not experienced by younger hunters. The challenges that seniors hunters experience include reduced stamina, limited travel distance and accessibility in the woods, reduced acuteness of all senses. Health-related concerns also limit exertion and cold temperature exposure, particularly to hunters with a history of heart problems. And perhaps the most directly related to this bill is waning eyesight that hinders antler identification, particularly brow tine identification. Frustration from antler identification is contributing to senior hunters hanging it up prematurely in disgust. Increasing their chance of success and enjoyment of field is inconsequential to any deer management program and undeniably beneficial to senior hunters. There will be no negative impact to the herd, and this burdensome, needless restriction is taken off the shoulders of our seniors. There is not always much we can do to extend involvement of our hunting patriarchs, but this is certainly one. It is difficult for me to understand how any sporting organization would not support this bill. House Bill 870 for removing utilization of DMAP program from our public lands is a bill that was born from hunter outcry identifying public land deer densities which are dangerously low and not sufficient to adequately support hunting activity. Although DMAP tags only make up a small portion of the total antlerless harvest, exerting additional hunting pressure in areas that have deer densities possibly as low as 4 to 8 deer per square mile contributes to the ongoing hunter disgust and departure from the sport. Game Commission doe allocations already encompass public lands. DCNR recently revealed they employ 0 individuals for improvement of habitat, food, or cover for wildlife. With that aspect known, why are they in deer reduction business rather than in the forestry and habitat business to enhance wildlife, especially game species, to drive revenue through hunting? They cannot have it both ways. They state their mission is to not to manage deer. That, as I was told in the past by DCNR Secretary Rich Allen at a meeting where I disputed and proved his claim to be inaccurate, that hunters still flock to the northern region. And I attached a letter in there from Secretary Allen. DCNR openly submits a plan to the PGC, as Mr. DeBrock identified, accepts DMAP doe harvest tags, distributes them, and willingly uses the DMAP tool originally intended for private landowners to reduce deer on public land for forest certification goals. DMAP also is being used and abused by private lease owners. This legislation will align their mission as it was identified by Secretary Allen with reality. It also has been revealed the return of DMAP harvest reports, a mandatory requirement of receiving a tag, is running less than 48%, as recently identified by Mr. Executive Director Matt Ho on February 18th. And that kind of already adds to the questionable harvest reports that we discussed earlier. And just a sidebar on that is if the numbers as they relate, we had 110,000 reported harvests this year, and the claimed harvest this year was 352,000 deer. So with a 31% harvesting rate, that's a long stretch from the actual quantifiable data to the number that they put out as the actual harvest. House Bill 1370, again, Representative Kulas, for decades, this was how the anticipated of opening days. This is for the 3-day, going back to the 3-day doe season following the buck. The separation of the two highly anticipated opening days, one for buck season and one for doe season, created an air of excitement and maximized hunter participation. Unfortunately, much of that excitement and participation has disappeared along with the deer due to the lumping together and overlap of those seasons by the Game Commission. Hunters who I have spoken with want to return to the years gone by where deer sightings were much more plentiful and doe season was its own special occasion. This legislation will do just that. Now, may I add to Representative Kuhla's explanation that currently Commissioner Layton, Tim Layton, understanding the benefits of the 3-day season, has instructed the deer staff to research the possibility of returning to the 3-day season following buck. Most hunters I encounter want the return of this season structure, and comments are now flooding the PGC comments link supporting Commissioner Layton's proposal. Many claims the concurrent season structure benefit youth hunters. That claim is completely false, and I can support that position today with the PGC data and graph presented showing the accelerated steady decline in youth hunting license sales that were actually increasing prior to 2004. In that particular document, I also added the mentored youth permit numbers, and we're not seeing the mentored youth permits of 35,000 a year translating into successive youth hunting licenses sales to any degree to the measure of the permits, which is a strong testament that these mentored hunters aren't experiencing something that's bringing them into as a youth license owner. We have taken away most of the deer and the thrill of identifying a buck and reduced the experience to brown its down to our youth. The adrenaline rush is diminished, and what was jovially identified by hunters as buck fever is now sadly cured. Additionally, and equally important, were the degrading economic aspects of departing from this season structure. For one example, hunters would previously travel to their camps on the last Friday of the buck season, hunt buck Saturday, stay and patronize local businesses Sunday, and again experience excitement of a second first day Monday, and then most would even stay into Tuesday, some even Wednesday. The last Saturday now is one and done for the very few that venture out, especially in the northern tier, the camp hunters. Legislating the return of this season structure will ensure that future misguided philosophies of biologists with tunnel vision, not realizing the social economic consequences of their actions, will never again ruin the tried and true benefits of this season structure. I believe some members here today identified that. I think that's a very big shortcoming from the agency, was the economics that are linked to these season structures and to deer. Returning to county-based units. The most glaring benefit of this bill is subdividing the state back to the previous 67 county units as established in 1951 by the General Assembly versus the now 23 units, which have been controversial since their creation in the late 1990s. In many areas, these existing units are too big to manage, consisting of large tracts of varying habitats. Going back to county units certainly will not align perfectly with varying habitats, but answer this question: will not smaller unit sizes permit a more concise breakdown and add to our statewide diverse regarding our state habitats diverse, so we would have a smaller division? The answer is unquestionably yes. County treasurers will again become more involved resolving sportsman problems with licensing, adding an additional benefit to hunters from the $1 per license they now receive. A little-known aspect in the development of these large units was the backdoor attempt to remove these county treasurers from the licensing process. The intent of 1724, as stated, is very good, and with the addition of perhaps having the county unit boundaries being set up as the closest physical definitive marker, such as roads and rivers, while maintaining majority land mass of the county, would be a suggested improvement to this bill. That's probably one of the only disputes that I get from sportsmen is some of the arbitrary county lines. Now, it did work for many decades, but that can be solved with some division of the nearest county line, so the county would encompass the majority land mass of the unit. So we would still have 67 units with definitive lines. We must remember departure from this county unit structure was not from problems nor hunter request. It was simply part of the now identified poorly thought out wholesale change implemented to enter in today's value-laden deer program. And I specifically heard earlier with Mr. DeBrock mention about having difficulty attaining data is why they combine units. That to me should not be the driving factor. It should be accuracy and having a good count of what we have habitat in deer, not to gain large lumps of data just because you have a difficult time. We should fix that problem if that is the case. House Bill 1726. Now this is the maximum sustained yield bill. This is returning deer management to the successful program used for decades that was instrumental in making Pennsylvania one of the top deer hunting states in the nation. A little over 12 years ago, this traditional method was replaced by a subjective value-laden management system that has proven not to be only unsuccessful as sound science, but also particularly detrimental to social and economic aspects previously linked to Pennsylvania deer hunting. It may be the best program on paper, but if it does not work for our state, then it must be eliminated. I use the term sound science because that term was continually used to describe this deer program. The June 21st, 2013 article in the Penn State News publication, authored by Jeff Mulholland, quoted biologist Dwayne Diefenbach identifying the failures of this program after 13 years. And may I quote, "In the last decade, deer impacts were reduced in many wildlife management units with lower deer populations," he said. Anecdotal, there's that word, observations suggest forest regeneration has improved, but large-scale quantitative forest analysis and monitoring has failed to indicate major changes in tree regeneration. Another statement from that article was the ability to explain the lack of change in tree regeneration, despite deer impact reductions, is critical to the Game Commission's deer management program. He went on to say the Commission needs more information about how the measure of deer browse impact as it is related to deer populations and forest regeneration. If these biologists identify in this article reduction has not shown improving regeneration, no pun, then we're barking up the wrong tree. Legislators, please stop this madness. MSY is a deer management method to assign deer densities balanced with their specific habitat. The guiding parameters are now being put together into 1726 as an amendment based on decades of MSY data, overlaid with today's forestry habitat. The agency has deliberately deceived the public, avoiding accuracy regarding deer numbers and harvest. I think to that comment to that, of all the questions I heard today about harvest reporting, I think we can see that there's one of the favorite colors of that agency is gray regarding deer harvest reporting, and because you can't nail anything down, and that's been one of the bigger problems. Before this program, hunters needed to identify whether deer harvests were on private or public lands. That was taken off our harvest report cards. You know, that's a piece of information they no longer needed. That was eliminated to further mask the low harvest on public lands. At the April 11th, 2011 Commissioner meeting, head deer biologist Dr. Rosenberry responded to Commissioner Tom Boop when Tom asked the question, approximately how many deer do we have in the Commonwealth? And I quote Dr. Rosenberry's response, "We do not need to know how many deer there are in the state. As long as we meet the goals of the deer management program, it does not matter." That statement has resonated to align with where we stand today. Too few deer, too many biologists, and goals now being realized as not in the best interest for sportsmen or the Commonwealth. In summary, The wholesale changes implemented to institute today's failed value-laden deer program have proven not to be in the best interest of sportsmen or the Commonwealth as a whole. Sportsmen have identified a steep increase of posted property in the last decade, in part from many landowners exiting the farm and game program to post their property to save the few deer they have left. Large tracts of game lands are still being purchased, while existing game lands remain pathetically undermanaged for habitat, as the complement of food and cover workers has steadily decreased, while positions are increased for biologists and foresters. Forest certification, combined with a team of biologists that lacked an understanding that the biology must be balanced with social economic needs, has proven disastrous. We have the determinations of the November 2012 Independent Legislative Budget and Finance Committee study revealing hundreds of millions of dollars of lost revenue to the state annually, compounding into billions over the past 13 years. I'd like to add to that money that's lost annually in sporting expenditures is also money we're losing in matching Pittman-Robertson funds back to the agencies, which isn't even identified there. May the elk in Benezet, Pennsylvania validate what the presence of big game will do for small-town economies. We have the very architects and managing biologists admitting the deer program has largely failed to produce forest regeneration, when forest indicators at the beginning of this program are relatively the same as at the end. It demands and deserves the recognition that the deer reduction in the middle served little to no beneficial purpose. The white elephant question is now, why are we dragging the state along under parameters of a failed program, while the biologists undertake a 5-year study to determine their miscalculations? Thank you, and I appreciate the time today to present this.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate the testimony that you're providing to the committee, and I have to say that many of my constituents would agree with the statements that you've made today. First question is Representative Lucas.
Thanks, Chairman. Randy, thanks for testifying. I want to talk a little bit about my resolution, H.R. 576, and I want to point out it's not a bill, it's a resolution.
I'm sorry if I said that.
No, you didn't. I don't think you did, but believe me. And the way I set it up and the reason I did it was because I had a constituent who runs a machine shop in northwestern Pennsylvania, and most people in my area hunt. And he had 16 people that wanted the first day of buck season off, and he could give 2 off. The company had to stay running. So and my son also is a college student, and to the best of my knowledge, there's not a single university that gives off the first day of deer season.
Right.
So we have a big population that can't make the first day of buck season. And it was to ask the Game Commission, the resolution was to ask the Game Commission to look into the possibility. And I did it specifically before deer season because I knew guys would be sitting around camp playing cards and maybe having a cocktail or two and discussing it. And I wanted their input. I advertised it. The article went into the Pennsylvania Door News, and sometimes, as they say, watch what you wish for. Because I got probably close to 1,000 emails, letters, and phone calls, and I listened to a lot of stories on the phone, and I'm good with that. And as you indicated, the rate was about 2/3 against, and the biggest reason was between travel time and people going to camps and tradition and things like that. And the biggest reason for would be, again, because people don't have the opportunity. They have to take time off from work or they can't get a time off work. And taking all the input I got from all the people involved, one thing that actually came, as I thought, was a pretty good compromise was and this is a Game Commission, this is up to them, whether they do this or not. And why they did it in bear season, I don't know, and what the ramifications of that are, I don't know. I went bear hunting this year on Saturday because I couldn't go on Monday, so it worked out well for me. Now maybe some other people doesn't work out that well for. But the thing I thought was a pretty good compromise was thinking about doing this as not a statewide start, but as individual areas. So the big woods, what I would consider the big woods, the northern tier, would have a traditional Monday start with the areas around the outside perimeters having a Saturday start. It's just an idea, and again, this decision is going to be on the Game Commission, not on the legislation. It's not legislation.
Right. Just to comment on that, the split I'm not sure would work because if you work in the south part of the state and you hunt in the north, it's going to, your business employment aspect of being off Monday is not going to change much, from a standpoint of if, depending on where you hunt. But what I used to see in the past, and I think most sportsmen, I don't know how they feel today, we obviously have some with us. If you're a hunter, you make your arrangements for the first day. You schedule your vacation. Your seniority takes hold. The guys that had less seniority chomped at the bit, went first Saturday. But they maybe would get off first month, that doe season. See, when you had the opening doe, that was like a compromise. You missed the first day of buck, but you could get the first day of doe because of seniority issues and so forth. It definitely worked. I understand your concerns. But as a sportsman, I'm not sure, like you said, if you're going to do more detriment to the sport. I think from everyone I've spoken to, and even some commissioners have contacted me, that they think that it's not going to gain you as much as what it's going to do. And I know particularly with the camp situation, it's been a very, very degrading thing because of the deer population. I'm sure Chairman Causer can attest to that. And that would be the final nail. If we lose the camp situation, I know my camp, it's sad, and here's the comment. The high point of the camp anymore is the fire Saturday night. It's no longer the Monday deer hunt because we don't have any deer. So, the camaraderie part of that is a big thing with the family getting together and so forth.
I live in northwestern Pennsylvania, and I have a hunting camp.
A little different in your area, yeah.
And I have a hunting camp in near Cook's Forest, and I've been going to the same camp for 30 years. So I go to camp regardless.
It's a great experience.
And yeah, exactly. But we've adapted at our camp where our big hunts now are in the early muzzleloader season and also in the flintlock season in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. And most of the guys hunt around home because that's where the deer are.
The deer are.
But I still go to camp, and I usually try and get a buck during archery season, so I don't have to worry about that.
But I just wanted to comment on that from what we've heard from our perspective.
Yeah, well, I understand. And again, the reason I brought it up was because of a constituent, and I thought that the compromise would be
and I do want to compliment you. I do want to compliment you. There's a legislator that went out and did something because of what he heard from his hunting constituents. That's what we need. That's what I think our agency's lacking. And that's why we're in the situation we are today, because the hunter outcry has not been heard in the last 10 years to try to do things to make things better. And that's where we are today. And I do want to compliment you on that you put it out there. You heard hunters and you got involved, and that's what we need. So
thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lucas. Chairman Haluska?
Thanks, Marty. Randy, thank you for your testimony. A couple things. We have the early season now for the juniors and the seniors. As far as releasing the antler restrictions on seniors, I kind of think that to me, I don't really, can't really fathom why we have to do that. They do have the early season.
Gary, isn't that doe, though? The early season's only doe hunting?
Right. What's the difference if you shoot a doe or a spike? Come on. Cut me a break.
This isn't about antlers.
It's harvesting a deer. And there's no allocations of doe licenses that get sold out in this state. So you can get a doe license. You have 7 days of the regular season to hunt antlerless. You also have the early season for the junior and the senior. Why in the world would we want to take the antler restrictions off of seniors?
Well, first of all, the taking the antler restrictions off the seniors, we have some seniors here today, I'm sure. I know myself, and there's a natural progression that I know that has been researched over the years through hunters. You start out with you want to get something, then it's you want to get a lot of something and then it progresses as you get older. You do become more selective. So that being said, as a hunter ages, he generally will wait for a larger buck. I know I do, probably a lot of you do. You don't shoot that small buck. But you also have the circumstance, or a lot of hunters that suffer from a lot of the issues that I mentioned, whether the eyesight's bad, there's a lot of issues there that a guy can go with his hunt with his friends and so forth. And he may go year after year after year because there's the apathy of being afraid to pull that trigger because you're not sure what you're seeing when you're an elderly gentleman, especially if, God forbid, you hunt with open sights.
Right.
That pretty much is obsolete.
But the commission and the legislature have worked hard to introduce the crossbow, which has helped a lot of the seniors, and it gets them out in the early season.
Right.
We have this early season for them. The doe license allocations aren't sold out. I can't foresee any reason in the world why we'd want to lift the antler restrictions for seniors.
Gary, all I can say is I really feel from a compassionate standpoint, from the sporting aspect, letting some elderly senior hunters be taken out of the antler restrictions, as I mentioned, is really inconsequential to the program. It doesn't do anything to affect your deer harvest. It's going to be such a low percentage, but it will allow those hunters that get out there that have difficulty identifying brow tines, or maybe can only hunt limited, maybe only on warmer days because they have heart issues, things like that. They get limited time. They should be allowed the opportunity to shoot a buck. If they're happy with a 4-point, I don't see why I should be telling them otherwise. That's what I've always felt.
Yeah. And the other question about going back to smaller management units, I know for years we pushed the Game Commission to look at larger management units with physical boundaries. When you're out hunting and you're in Cambria County, you don't know where the Indiana County line is, you don't know where the Clearfield County line is or the Blair County line. So it made a lot of sense to look at management units, put physical boundaries. You cross a road, you cross a river, you know what management unit you're in. So that was obviously a good thing, I think. As far as the county treasurers, I think to benefit all the sportsmen, we should do away with the county treasurer allotment of doe licenses. You should be able to get your doe license when you go to your pals, when you go to your local store and you get your regular license. And if you, like I said, right now, we don't sell out any of the doe license allocations. So you'd be able to walk into your store, get your electronically, get your doe license, ask for the management unit. If it does get sold out, then you can go to a lottery system. And if the county treasurers want to be a full-fledged issuing agent, fine, let them participate. Some do, some don't. But it's just, to me, it's crazy in this day and age with electronics that we have to do all that paperwork, mailing to get a doe license. It just doesn't make sense.
I think what I'd like to, I got a call, in fact, last night by a gentleman, I think it's Jefferson County Treasurer, Jim Van Steenbrook, I think his nickname is Moon. And he's been educated me quite a bit on how much work these county treasurers, in fact, in his office, will do when there are problems with the PAL system, duplicate addresses, things like that. And I guess the way I look at this too is the beneficial side from the treasurer's office. If I go to Walmart, the kid with 15 earrings in his ears isn't going to help me. I can go to my county treasurer and he will make the calls to the agency and get the problems ironed out when they do come up.
Well, like I said, they can be full-fledged issuing agents. That's no problem. They can put a system in their office and do it if they want. So to me, it's just a lot of redundancy for the sportsman.
Well, back to the county base, they really, having smaller units and going back to the arbitrary boundaries, that worked for many, many decades. And WCOs had a certain level of discretion when hunters were in a questionable area. But, the big thing is to get back to areas that I think to divide the state into smaller units. 67, I know some states like Colorado have much, an enormous amount of units depending on. So again, one of the bigger problems we see with habitat and the argument on the Game Commission side, deciphering habitat types, when you've got one management like 2G that's a 4,000 square mile. I mean, it's an enormous unit. If that was broken into 7 or 8 or 9 different subgroups, certainly you could manage better. They may not be the perfect by habitat guidelines, but you can certainly address things better on the county level, and that's the reason for part and parcel with the deer reduction problem.
Okay, thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Chairman Haluska. Representative Kula.
I really don't have a question. I guess just a statement to Randy. I appreciate your being here today. I know when you give testimony at these hearings, you have talked with your members that are here today. Right. And it's not just your voice that's speaking, it's the hunters that are here. And I appreciate your coming here today to speak.
I appreciate you clarifying that, Representative Kula, because it's not just Unified Sportsmen. We've been one of the more vocal in the past decade, but we've got a coalition alignment with the Allegheny County Sportsmen's League. I think Representative Maloney mentioned this. Eastern Coalition, other groups. The Camp Lease Owners Association was planning on testifying with me a few minutes today. This is a statewide problem that I get, and my girlfriend here, Barb, can testify that I get calls probably 4 times a week from sportsmen from all over the state. The frustration levels are and that's why I just don't see this disconnect that the Game Commission doesn't see of the sporting. I think the license sales tell us that. I think the declining youth sales are telling us the problem. I think the sportsmen coming to you and what you're doing here today with hearings are telling us there's a problem. I think we need to find, and some of these tools that I mentioned earlier, they're a little more than going back to some of the stuff. For your 3-day season, I've had it told to me from agency personnel that we needed the 2-week to harvest more doe and so forth. That was true the first year or two when they were trying to bring the herd down. But if all of us here remember back when you have to, and maybe the guys here can back me up on this, when you sent for your doe permit up in the northern tier, you mailed that doe permit a day or two before the county accepted them. If you didn't mail it that soon and you waited till the following, you didn't get one. Am I right, guys? You remember that? So you can't tell me that it was based on the 3 days. It was more that they weren't issuing enough doe permits back then. They had the tool in place with the two separate seasons to increase doe harvests in those areas. Guys used to drive to the courthouses to make sure they got one. So the biggest benefit to going back to the 3 day, not only to help the herd, I think it's the social economic. That 2 starts and the fact that you stimulate, you bring the camp guys to the mountains again in that second Saturday. They spend that 4 or 5 days of stimulating economies. Whether if it's going downtown on Sunday and watching a Steeler game, God bless them. They're stimulating business and economy, and that's the part of this thing that I think really has seen a fallen on deaf ears. But your bill, I think, would help that.
And thank you, Representative Kula. Representative Maloney, if you could keep your comments brief,
I will.
so that we can still move on to the last testifier.
Imagine that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No offense.
I just really want to make a comment and maybe ask you to touch on something for everybody here, and that is something that's near and dear to me, and that is the mentoring program, which I do wholeheartedly support and was very excited for the fact that the Game Commission took that on. But could you speak a little bit to the numbers that we have here and with respect to what you hear from our youth and the mentoring program?
Well, the mentoring program, I don't think anybody can deny it. Its intent and what it can do is a good thing. I mean, get kids out there, get them involved. The problem is, if you don't have product on the shelves, you're not going to hold their interest. We have a couple people. In fact, one of our Unified gentlemen today, one of our directors brought his daughter with him because she's been out. I think Debbie referenced her 6 times, and Wayne told me that story coming home this year. He's so frustrated, he's afraid he's going to lose his daughter's interest. And this I hear thousands of times over the course of the year from sportsmen. They're so frustrated, there's no game to hold the interest of the kids. And when you look at the paperwork that I sent regarding, I don't know if you see the graph there on the second page of that, if I can find it. There is a, yes, that graph identifies the youth license sales situation. If you see starting in 2004, 2004 is when the deer herd was just steeply dropped. And that was 3 years of concurrent seasons. In 2004 is when it was realized. And those youth numbers, and I didn't even know this until I started doing some more research recently, if you look at the mentor license sales, they averaged, the permits averaged 31,945 over the past 4 years. But they're not transmitting into junior license sales at anywhere near the pace of that. Now, granted, all those kids aren't of age. They might be 9 instead of 11 and so forth. But if you look at 09, we had 86,629 licenses. The next year it dropped by 3,000 after we sold 28,000 mentor tags. So that's a strong statement that the mentored program, although it's getting kids in the woods, there's some reason that they're not interested in continuing on. And I think a big problem with that is we don't have enough of game in this state.
Thank you, Representative Maloney. And thank you, Randy, for your testimony. It's very helpful to the committee.
Well,
thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Our next testifier is Melody Schell with the Pennsylvania Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. Welcome, Melody. And you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Causer, Chairman Haluska, and members of the committee. My name is Melody Schell, and I'm here today on behalf of the Pennsylvania Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. PFSC's membership is comprised of 200-plus clubs, 5 statewide organizations, and individuals representing more than 70,000 sportsmen and women. Thank you for the invitation to provide testimony today. Deer management has always been a contentious issue in Pennsylvania, balancing the herd to levels that would please hunters, allow for healthy deer, quality habitat that can support healthy deer in a varied ecosystem, and avoid an overabundance of deer-human conflict is probably an impossible expectation. In the late 90s and early 2000s, deer numbers in some parts of the states were so high they were literally eating themselves out of house and home. Deer in many areas of the state were showing signs of poor health, habitat quality was poor, and regeneration of trees and understory was non-existent. Deer-human conflict was at unacceptable levels, and citizens were asking their legislators to do something. Deer populations in some parts of Pennsylvania were clearly reaching the upper limits of the carrying capacities, and in some instances had already exceeded that value. Due to pressure from farmers, landowners, and timber companies, many in the legislature were demanding the Game Commission do something to address the overabundant deer herd. For years, the commissioners refused to follow the advice of their biologist and reduce the deer herd. However, in the early 2000s, the agency and commissioners took a bold step and introduced a herd reduction plan. Over the next several years, hunters did their part and reduced the deer herd. The majority of sportsmen understood the deer management plan was implemented to help reduce the rapidly growing herd, one that was destroying a sustainable habitat necessary to ensure its own future survival as well as that of other wildlife. One that we hunters were partly responsible for creating because we wanted and expected to see lots of deer and because deer are such resilient creatures. We have followed the issue closely over the years, listening to the complaints of those not happy with the program and listening to those who like seeing healthier deer and improving habitats in forestry. PFSC supported the program because we understood the need for a healthy deer herd the size that is in balance with the surrounding habitat, one that can be supported by that habitat without greatly infringing on it or wiping it out. We understood that the habitat recovery would not happen overnight, and a long-term commitment to reduce deer populations in some areas would be needed. PFSC supports the concurrent seasons because they provide more opportunity to all hunters, especially our youth hunters and those with limited time off to hunt, and we support the antler restrictions to help protect more buck to bring the buck-to-doe ratio in line. We can all pretty much agree that the deer numbers are down from where they were 10 years ago. And yes, some believe they are down too far in some areas, so they are asking for changes. A few think we should go back to the old way of doing things, yet others believe that we need to stay on course with the continued tweaking here and there. Some are concerned that the entire program will be thrown out because of the desire of some hunters to see more deer. PFSC has always supported science-based wildlife management, not emotional or politically controlled wildlife management. We will usually give our wildlife managers, the biologists, the benefit of the doubt when it comes to their recommendations if they can back it up with valid data. We do not believe they are our enemies or that they are trying to sell the sportsmen down the river. This does not make us a PGC yes group. We just support a system where a group of our peers, the commissioners, who are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, are the better choice for weighing the science with the social and economic impacts, making decisions relating to wildlife management regulations. We do not support a system that allows legislators to make those decisions via legislation that is based on emotional or personal political agendas. Allowing any of these bills that are the subject of today's hearing move forward would allow politics and emotion to set precedents in how all wildlife management decisions are set, opening up a Pandora's box for future attacks on our proud outdoor heritage and wildlife resources. Just a side point here, that's not to say that we don't believe that that you should be doing what you're doing now and holding hearings on these matters. We believe that is your duty. We just don't believe that the legislative route is the way to solve the problems. Additionally, access to private land continues to be and should be of paramount importance to all sportsmen. The farming community, as well as large timberland owners, have been strongly supportive of herd reduction and associated programs such as DMAP. They have continued to provide public access to many sportsmen because they know that the hunting tool is the most economical solution to any deer management problems they are having. Even the DCNR, as a large public landowner, has increased efforts to make its lands more accessible to sportsmen. We believe the stewardship practices and desires of private landowners must be given significant consideration, sometimes more so than those who occasionally visit such lands for recreational purposes, so as to maintain that public access to thousands, if not millions of acres of privately owned land. So while we do not support any of the following bills, specifically because we do not support wildlife management via legislation, I would like to share the results of a poll conducted recently with our members when we asked their opinions on the topics of the legislation. The first one, excluding public lands from DMAP, over 75% were opposed. Most felt this was an important and necessary tool that needed to be available, especially in those areas with habitat regeneration problems. Remove antler restrictions for seniors. 87% were opposed. While I didn't ask their age, many of the respondents did inform me that they were seniors and were appalled that it was believed they needed special privilege. One comment said, "As a senior hunter, age 72, I find this suggestion almost insulting. I have had well over 50 years of deer hunting and have harvested more than my fair share of deer. If I can't count the points, then I will let it walk for a younger hunter, and I will wait for a doe." The 3-day doe season following buck season. 99% opposed. Most comments reflected support for continued concurrent seasons where harvest was determined by the number of doe tags issued. It provides more opportunities, and weather conditions are not as much of a limiting factor. WMUs back to the county units. Again, 99% were opposed. Most comments reflected support for the current WMUs for ease of identifiable boundaries, larger areas available to hunt with one tag, and counties are not large enough areas for gathering quantifiable data. Use maximum sustainable year method of management. 98% opposed. 2 of the comments from those who said they supported this admitted that they really didn't understand what it meant. Comments from those opposed reflected the need for balancing the herd to allow for coexistence with other wildlife and limit deer-human conflicts. To start the rifle deer season on Saturday after Thanksgiving. 99% were opposed. Some did not want to lose a day of small game hunting, but the majority just did not support the change in the current tradition unless they had Sunday hunting. Then several said they would maybe consider it. We also asked if they supported any efforts to implement wildlife management regulations via legislation, and 100% were opposed. All comments were diametrically opposed, to quote one of the responder. Most of the other comments were not printable. Although these may appear to be turbulent times for both agencies and their respective boards of commissioners, the stellar accomplishments they have achieved over the past century should not be overlooked. They have done a yeoman's job of enhancing and protecting our natural resources and with severely limited financial resources. We believe much of the current controversies, for lack of a better term, stem more from personality conflicts, power struggles, and lack of sufficient knowledge on the issues at hand. Decisions are being based more on emotions than facts. That doesn't serve anyone well, neither the resources nor the residents of the Commonwealth. It is unnecessary and narrow-minded to institute what we believe are legislative changes that will compromise our resources, our outdoor heritage, and our rights, including our Second Amendment rights, in the future should these changes be implemented. Therefore, we adamantly oppose any and all legislation that sets legislative mandates for wildlife management decisions, threatens the limited independence of our resource agencies, or merges the agencies, particularly with a merger that would place them under DCNR. In closing, as sportsmen, we recognize that one of the greatest benefits of our sport is the camaraderie that we share on a field. Whether it's been pheasant hunting at Ralph Owens Farm or fishing for walleye on a Lake Erie charter, we've certainly enjoyed ourselves afield in the company of Chairman Haluska. Although we didn't always agree on all the issues, your openness and accessibility to our members was always appreciated, and it will be missed. We wish you well in your endeavors and hope you'll keep in touch, and also a happy belated birthday. Thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Melody. I know the members have a number of questions. Speaker Smith has given us an additional 15 minutes before session will start, so we still have time for questions. One comment that I wanted to make, from your testimony, your statement that the current controversies stem more from personality conflicts, power struggles, or a lack of sufficient knowledge of the issue at hand, and then to say that the legislation is unnecessary and narrow-minded, I think is insulting to the committee. To make statements like that. Maybe that is your personal opinion, I don't know, but I think it insults the committee. And to me, statements like that in many ways make legislators feel like the Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs is irrelevant in many ways, when statements like that are made. So I find that insulting. But I respect your opinion and your right to testify how you see fit. Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Melanie. This one's going to come right out of left field. Your organization support or not support Sunday hunting?
It's kind of almost a 50-50 right now. We support the concept that the Game Commission should be making the decision on whether we have Sunday hunting. I can't say that all of our members would support it, but it's kind of about a 50-50.
So it could go either way.
Yeah.
What's your personal opinion? Curious, since you are the head or speaking for the Federation, curious what your personal opinion is there.
Well, on behalf of the organization, my personal opinion doesn't matter.
I know that. I'm just asking what your personal opinion is.
I would support it.
Thank you. A statement that I will make. We've been talking about, deer management, and for what part I could be here because I'm juggling two things at the same time today. In the northern tier, I can understand why there's such a huge problem, but one of the things that the Game Commission I don't think has quite grasped yet is down in my neck of the woods, most of the farmland now is leased by groups and organizations, and they took the deer management right out of the hands of the Game Commission. And I myself have lost because I refused to pay somebody that used to let me hunt their land for free. I refused to join a club just so I can go hunt that land. Is that the direction by supporting? And I don't have anything against Game Commission. I think those guys do a good job, and for the most part, and they have the best interest at heart. Might be misguided at times, I don't know. But is that where we're going to wind up with eventually with all the land in the state, in your opinion, if we don't change something that all the private land is its own game management system?
Let me speak on behalf of my experience of moving from Pennsylvania to Alabama. In Alabama, there is no public land. Everything is private land. And if I want to hunt in Alabama, I have to join a lease. So I guess the only thing that I can say for sure is appreciate the amount of state land that you have here in Pennsylvania to hunt on, because there's hardly any other states that have that type of a situation. But as far as the public land issue goes, I mean, it is a private landowner's right to do whatever they want with their land. And if they choose to lease it, I don't like that either, but I don't think you can blame the deer management program on the reason that that's happening.
I think the point that I'm making is that if somebody doesn't give one side or the other to find a happy medium where we can have economic development, especially in those northern counties, and I used to hunt up there all the time, what's going to happen, I see down the road, is more and more of that land, because they don't own all the land, okay, is going to be managed by these sportsmen's clubs and literally take these guys right out of the equation, and they'll run their own system and pretty much render them moot. But that's my observation, because that's what's exactly happened in my neck of the woods. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. Chairman Haluska.
Thank you. Thanks, Melanie, for your testimony. Just to follow up on what Dan was just saying, if you go to Ohio, you cannot step onto any private property unless you have a written note that you carry with you that says you have explicit right to hunt that property. So it is tough to go to Ohio if you don't know somebody and actually find the public property is not very easily identified. We've been blessed in Pennsylvania because, our trespass laws are very weak, number one. We don't have as much posted land as some other people, and we do have a lot of public land. And obviously there's a lot of people up in Marty's area that decry the Game Commission or DCNR of purchasing any more property because they have so much property. So, we're really fortunate in Pennsylvania that we do have the opportunities to hunt. And I think if you travel to the Midwestern states and everywhere else, like you found out in Alabama and other people have told me in Florida, it's just not as easy to hunt in those states as it is here, because if you don't have permission or you don't sign a lease to hunt, you really don't have anywhere to go. So, that's something that I think we have to keep in mind in Pennsylvania, how fortunate we are.
And just to follow up on that, you mentioned the having the written permission. That is something that the Federation has been in support of over the years, that if something like that were to pass. It's very controversial, though. I mean, it's kind of like one of those Sunday hunting issues, because Pennsylvania sportsmen are just so used to the open lands policy of, well, if I've always hunted there, I should still always be able to hunt there. And so it does become a little bit of a PR issue.
Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Melody, for your testimony. You're the executive director of
No, sir.
what's-
I used to be the executive director.
Okay.
I'm just a spokesperson right now.
Okay. Do they have an
Yes, sir.
executive? All right, so because I was going to say, you just said you live in Alabama? Okay.
I still come back and help for different functions, and I have grandkids here now, so that brings me back quite frequently.
Okay. All right, because I was a little confused as to, because you used to be the executive director.
I used to be the executive
Okay, that's
director.
what I thought. I guess it kind of threw me for a loop, so I drew a blank here for a second. But your survey, how many sportsmen's clubs are there in the state of Pennsylvania? Do you know that by chance? I mean, roughly?
Probably 800, 900 or more.
800 or 900, okay. And do you know how many actually belong to PFSC?
It's anywhere from 2 to 250. Right now is the renewal time, so, I mean, last year we had, I think, around 230. I just said over 200 because I'm not sure exactly how many, but it's looking like right around between 220, I think we have right now. that have
Okay,
renewed.
so maybe a quarter of all the clubs in the state actually are members of PFSC?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're speaking not for all clubs, you're speaking on behalf?
Just the members,
The quarter that are your members?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
ones that we hear from.
Right. And so I just have a quick question about your survey. So how did you conduct that survey?
We have over 900 emails, addresses from these clubs and our individual members that are on our list, and we emailed those 900 members.
So it wasn't really a scientific
No, sir.
survey?
No, it's just a
Because some
poll.
of those numbers are quite substantial. 99%.
I found in my years with dealing with sportsmen and sportsmen's issues is those who are not happy will usually be the ones that always, respond to things. If the people that are happy or don't care, then oftentimes we don't even hear back from them. I was surprised that they came. I thought it would be a little more skewered than it is, but
Okay. All right. All right, that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Maloney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a couple points, Melody. I mean, you did mention 70,000 sportsmen and women with respect to the question that Representative Emmerich asked. So I know I had mentioned earlier that just one of our organizations has that many in it, much less the other hundreds of thousands. So you are in Alabama. How long you been there?
4 years.
So do you still hunt here in Pennsylvania?
No, sir.
Okay. I think it's just interesting with respect to this information and your survey because I did receive a letter this week or last couple of weeks from one of your members that sits on your board, and pretty much her letter was verbatim what you read today.
Excuse me, sir. We don't have any females on the board, so if you say her, she's not on our board.
Well, she just might be a member. But anyway, it was somewhat alarming to me when you say about politically controlled. I brought this up earlier, Melody. It baffles me when it's good for us to use something, but yet when it's a tool for somebody else or the only way that they have with respect to getting their message out, then it's political. When you talk about the governor confirmed by the Senate, are you familiar with all the controversy that's taken place with the Game Commission as of this week?
Yes, sir.
So the governor asked for the resignation of every commissioner over their behavior this week. You don't think that's serious?
Yes, sir. I do think it's serious.
Okay. Just want to clear that up. You know, it really grieves me, the fact that we even have to talk like this and that we even have to be so passionate about something that I think many of us believe in. I brought up the mentoring program because children are very near and dear to me. And yet you just made clear that somebody who's going to be your paid lobbyist going door to door in this house, in this building, called me anti-family. Do you condone that?
I'm not quite sure how you're referring to calling you anti-family.
Well, that's what he called me. I've been very clear about my passion to children and families and have worked very diligently on passing child protection bills that, God willing, will make it to the governor's desk. And your paid lobbyist called me anti-family. Now, if you're going to be here representing this group, and you insulted us, as the chairman said, it's either you representing the group that's insulting us, or you're insulting us, because your paid lobbyist insulted me. To something that I take tremendous offense to. So going back to the original statements that I have made with respect to the public relations of our sportsmen, their legislators, their voices, how do we reconcile that?
I don't have a quick answer for you, but I'd be happy to sit down with you and discuss it in more details.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other questions from the members? No other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Okay, if I can just show you in closing, I know it was discussed earlier about the youth, mentored youth program and stuff. Anybody would like a copy, I'd be happy to give you a copy of our latest on Target. The front cover is Brandon Ebersole. His mother and dad, stepfather, I think actually work here in the Capitol. But we asked for pictures of youth specifically for the last couple editions were on Target, and we were just bombarded with all the positive stories. I mean, here's a 12-year-old with a huge trophy buck. So there are deer out there, and there are a lot of mentored youth that are enjoying the deer hunting season. Thank you.
I want to thank all the members for their attendance and for the questions and comments. The information that's presented is very helpful to the committee, and I want to thank everyone who took time to travel here today. The crowd that we have here today shows just how important this issue is, and the information, as I said, that's been collected today will be shared, because there will be a transcript, will be shared with the members who couldn't attend the entire meeting. But the information is very helpful to the committee. So thank you very much, and this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.